webinars for 2025. I'm delighted to welcome Brandon Rochester from York St John University, who's speaking on the Ecocide nexus in industrial animal agriculture. We've previously had sessions on Ecocide. We had a session on Ecocide in November of last year, where Stacey Bamwell talked about Ecocide in the context of the industrial animal complex. So this session follows on neatly from that one. It's also timely because of some of the discussions that are going on around Ecocide and the sort of relatively new legal definition of Ecocide from an international panel of experts. There's long been a debate about whether or not Ecocide should be recorded as a fifth crime against peace under the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court. But more widely, it's accepted that the notion of ecocide is something that we should be looking at, and that particularly green criminologists are interested in terms of kind of mass environmental related harm, and in particular, now looking at harms against animals. So, Brandon, the floor is yours. You can take as long as you like, really, up to around half an hour or so. And then then we've got time for questions, and I'll stop the recording at that point. So thanks for accepting this invitation, and look forward to hearing you speak. All yours.
Cheers. Thank you, Angus. So this, I hope it takes around half an hour. It's my first time going through the slides while speaking, so we'll see. If I'm running over time, I'll try to pace up it in a few of the sections. So today I'll be discussing the mass killing of animals and the mass destruction of the environment, and how these two entities are linked within the industrial animal agriculture. I'll be giving more attention to Ferriocide, and I'll be giving less attention to Ecocide because I feel like the former needs a little bit more attention within our field. So just to give you a little description of what's to come, I'm going to start off by identifying the gap within our field. I believe there is a gap, and I believe more attention needs to be given to the topics on which we'll be discussing today. And I'll also be justifying why this is an issue, giving an overview of the harm. And then I'll also define what I mean by the Ferrocide-Ecocide nexus. I hope my definition of it makes sense, but we'll see in the Q&A later. Then I'll be going over three key areas, three key places where I believe more research within our field ought to take place, and also three areas of research that have and could contribute a lot to this discussion. First, I'll be looking into social psychology, looking at how classification of animals and nature occurs. And I'll also be looking at some historical discourses around this. Secondly, I'll be looking at a critical legal approach, looking at how animals and nature are legally discriminated within most systems. Particularly, I'll be looking at the UK system when it comes to animal welfare, and I'll also be looking at international environmental law briefly to look at how nature is discriminated against. And finally, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that there are calls from treadmill theorists to have more of a political economic approach within green criminology, and I feel like animal agriculture, the animal industrial complex, necessitates this. And I'm looking at the treadmill of production and what I call the techniques of acceleration. So moving on, in criminology, animals and the harms within animal agriculture are generally unseen and examined. So there's many reasons for this. So since the beginning of social science as a field, a nature/society dualism has persisted that has limited the study of criminology as a social science and sociology to issues concerning society itself, rather than looking at nature. This means that nature has generally been viewed as something other and something for natural scientists to examine. Much of this comes from Durkheim's idea of social facts, meaning that sociologists should study social processes and actors rather than anything outside of that, anything within nature. In a similar vein, traditional approaches to criminology have also been long limited by this approach, but additionally, they've been limited by what you might call a legalistic paradigm, whereby crimes that have been investigated have mainly, traditionally, been limited by legal parameters and definitions. As such, many harms that escape such a characterization of the legal system have been left unexamined, at least until around the 1970s and until recently, with the advent of radical, critical, green, and non-specious criminologies. Nonetheless, even still, unfortunately, within many of these fields, there is still a reluctance or a less of an emphasis, I would say, to examine the harms that are perpetrated against non-human animals within industrial animal agriculture, and also the harms that emanate from the system, such as the environmental harms that we'll talk a little bit about today. I would say this is because although criminology takes a critical approach and a harm-based approach, many of the harm-based approach we have are very humanistic. We might extend our scope past the legal parameters of our nation and potentially look at human rights and human rights standards to examine social ills, but this is still very humanistic, and it doesn't really include non-human animals within that social parameter of examination. Even still, even when criminologists do tend to examine animal abuse or animal harm, such as non-specious criminologists, they still tend to, I would say, overlook to an extent animal agriculture, despite it being a mass site of harm. Most studies, which is, well, it's a good thing that they do this because these are obviously important places to look at. They tend to look at illegal wildlife trades, sexual assault against animals, and how animal abuse is linked to the co-occurrence of domestic violence or abuse against humans. So I would say there is a gap definitely within this field. I think more attention could be given to it, but I would say in the past 5 years since I've embarked on this endeavor to look at these kind of issues, there's been a lot more research, mainly within books rather than articles, however. Moving on, just to define what I mean by the ferrocide-ecocide nexus, I'll give you a little summary of what I think it is. So this nexus is basically a concept which suggests that there are interrelations between the mass killing of non-human animals and the degradation of the environment. These interrelations are both physical, ideological, and causal. So it describes how ecocide and ferrocide, which is a very hard word to say. I feel like I've been pronouncing it wrong until I heard you pronounce it earlier, Angus. It looks at how these two are connected materially and how they share similar ideological or underlying processes that constitute both. As such, there's what I call a material chain and an ideological chain. I've given you a kind of like an equation to emphasize this. So for instance, ecocide can lead to ferrocide physically. So deforestation can lead to habitat loss, which can lead to species decline. Therefore, the ecocide of deforestation can lead to the ferrocide of species decline. Again, ferrocide can lead to ecocide, which is kind of what we're going to be discussing today, in that animal agriculture can lead to pollution, can lead to deforestation, which can therefore be judged as ecocide. Moreover, in the ideological sense, in the underlying causal factors that are related to cognitive, social, discursive, and structural processes, ferricide and ecocide are linked. So, for instance, the ideology of anthropocentrism or speciesism, along with capitalist relations within economics, and potentially discrimination within legal systems, can lead to the commodification of nature, where animals and nature are seen as properties, objects, or commodities, which therefore leads to viewing and treating them as such, which therefore leads to mass degradation and mass animal death, particularly within the industrial animal agricultural industry. I hope that makes sense. We'll, if it doesn't, we'll have a discussion about it after. One way in which we can see this link early on is how this industry of industrial animal agriculture, one, harms animals, and two, harms the environment. The research on this slide is very much UK based. If you're interested, in the right-hand side is a description of the livestock within certain counties. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but currently I'm in Lincolnshire, and it turns out we have the most livestock per county here. We also have a lot of issues based on this with air pollution recently. I think 11%. There's been an 11% increase in the amount of air pollution within Lincolnshire due to poultry intensification. But anyway, so in December 2024 alone, as you can see, this many, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there were 156,000 cattle, over 1 million sheep, almost 1 million pigs, and almost 80 million broilers killed in the UK within that single month. That's insane. For a small island, for a small place, it's quite large. Obviously, death isn't the only issue within this industry. We also have issues of overcrowding, the issues that come with selective breeding, which we'll get into a little bit later. The fact that generally there's unhygienic conditions within this industry, and that despite welfare laws, mutilations still occur. Moreover, within the UK alone, around 12% of all greenhouse gases come from the animal agricultural industry, according to DEFRA. Although this has decreased in recent times, most of that decrease came within a 10-year period and has since stagnated over the last 20 years. But if you look down to the right, you'll see how agriculture compares to other industries in terms of its greenhouse gas and ammonia outputs. It's quite a big difference, I would say. You might say that animal agriculture doesn't account for much CO2 emissions, which is definitely true. But when we take a look at the relative impact or the global warming potential, which is a measure of how bad it is for the environment over 100 years. That was a terrible definition, but it's the best one I have with me right now. It suggests that nitrous oxide, for instance, which is mainly caused by manure and the leaching and the runoff of this manure within the ecosystem, this greenhouse gas has a 273 global warming potential in comparison to CO2. So although CO2 isn't a major issue within this industry, much worse greenhouse gases are, including methane, which again is caused by primarily livestock. Again, another big issue is ammonia, which, as you can see, ammonia is primarily caused by the agricultural industry, and it's gotten a lot worse in recent years, based on the intensification of poultry systems. And this is bad because, you know, ammonia is a leading cause of air pollution, and it's not really good for the health of us or the animals within these industries. Other impacts, of course, include soil erosion, desertification, water pollution. I'm not sure if anyone knows about the state of the River Wye. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I've only read it in articles, but it's not in good shape based on these industries and their intensification around those areas. So this basically illustrates that animal agriculture causes ecocide. Killing of animals on a mass scale causes ecocide. When I say ecocide, I think I should mention this. When I say ecocide, I am taking this from a very much colloquial understanding. I'm not talking about the expert panel's recent definition. I think there's issues with all legal definitions based on the fact that they're trying to be pragmatic. When I refer to ecocide, I simply just mean the large scale or severe or potentially widespread harm to the environment. So moving on. Now we're going to look a little bit at some of the social psychology literature and the discourse that perpetuates speciesism and anthropocentrism. So if you haven't already, I have the book somewhere in here, but it's probably in a pile somewhere. If you haven't already, I really recommend reading the book down to the left, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows by Melanie Joy. Looking into this field, there are plenty of lessons that can be learned for us green criminologists. I'm not sure if anyone's aware of the field of critical animal studies. I think they get a lot right in the fact that they look at interdisciplinary research such as social psychology, discourse analysis, and economics, and over social theories like Marxism and feminism, and they have quite a really good, rigorous study into human-animal relations. I feel like we can learn a lot from their research. A lot can be achieved, I think, through cross-fertilization between these two fields. I don't think there's much similar apart from these distinctions we have that I don't think should really be there. Anyway, so there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from a lot of the social psychological research that has come out within the last 15 years. So in her book, the book down on the left there, Joy argues that carnism, this invisible ideology that causes us to eat animals, begins by the development of a speciesist or a carnistic schema. A schema, this schema is built up by discourse, it's built up by our experiences, our perceptions, and our ideas of the world. It's basically a way in which the world is represented to us. It's how we see the world, the objects, and the entities within it. By way of analogy, a schema, it's useful to think of it like a filing cabinet, with each file, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, with each file representing a different entity or object within the universe, and the cabinet itself being our brain. So each file is built up of knowledge, ideas, and perceptions of that particular entity, and therefore when we come across that entity, we have immediate presuppositions about it. Okay, as such, these schemas, these natural mental elements of all animals, work like a mental characterization mechanism, which, like I said before, classifies or categorizes objects and entities within the world. It's an innate process, which means it's natural. Many animals have it, and it's generally quite useful in a evolutionary sense, i.e. it can help us differentiate between predators, prey, friends or foe, and so on. However, there's an issue with this. Although it's a natural process in our brains, these schemas are representations of the world can be infiltrated with dichotomous characterizations, i.e. dualisms. These dualisms typically denote an in-group and an out-group using the language of social identity theory. And the in-group is typically associated with the good, and the out-group is typically associated with the bad. Again, the in-group is superior, and the out-group is inferior. In terms of dualisms, we can see ones that have dominated throughout time, such as man and beast, human and animal, inedible and edible, potentially, if we're talking about animals we eat, and culture and nature. So these schematic assumptions we have of these entities ultimately impact how we treat them. And because they impact how we treat them, it means that they're very much influential on the way our societies are built. So this basically means that the characterization of animals in nature we have are typically lesser, and meaning that they become others. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Going on to some more recent social psychological research, looking at social dominance theory and social dominance human-animal relation theory, which is specifically catered to human-animal relations studies. We can, us as green criminologists can learn a lot. So amongst a lot of things, because it's quite a broad theory, social dominance theory, amongst other things, this theory suggests that societies is a place of natural competition between groups, and as such, it is infested by both hierarchy legitimizing and hierarchy attenuating myths and social institutions. But we're going to focus on the hierarchy enhancing myths for now. So for those Marxists out there, this is very much similar to the ideas by Althusser in his idea of the ideological state apparatus, or Antonio Gramsci and his idea of hegemony. So such myths, such hierarchy enhancing or legitimizing myths reinforce the dualisms that we already have through our schemas. And they help us maintain our belief that we are superior and that our domination over nature and animals is natural, necessary, needed. Basically, that it's the way things are supposed to be. These myths, again, are permeated through several institutions, such as the law, media, the everyday language in which we use our discourse, and also political economics. Which again is something that we're going to go on. Interestingly, according to social dominance theory, those with this trait called social dominance orientation, which is a term that describes an individual's preference for hierarchies within social systems, it suggests that people with this trait are more likely to A, accept these myths, B, through a lot of recent research, be a speciesist, and C, be an anti-environmentalist. This basically points to the interconnectedness between our social psychological frameworks, our schemas, and the ways in which we view both the environment and animals within it, leading to the conclusion that if you're likely to be a speciesist, you're likely to be an anti-environmentalist, meaning that you're likely to reinforce these ideas at the same time. Therefore, this kind of shows that there's an interconnection between these traits. So moving on a little, so some of the myths that have perpetuated these ideas are very much found in historical discourse that have perpetuated this human-animal divide, or this human-animal and nature divide. And I'll briefly touch on some of these discourses that relate, but I've tried to make this a little bit quicker due to time. So the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who is depicted on the left here with the magnificent beard, he can probably be attributed with having the most substantial impact on how we see ourselves in relation to non-human animals and the plant kingdom. He famously developed a tripartite system, a trichotomous worldview, where humans, animals, and plants are separated from one another. So although he saw that there was great similarity between those three entities, he says that humans had a logos. A logos is the rational capacity of humans, or of anything really, but humans to him held this capacity solely, and therefore we were superior to others, and that therefore animals existed for humans, and plants also existed for animals. Therefore, he suggests that humans were at the top, plants were just beneath that. No, sorry, animals were beneath that, based on this inability to be rational, and that plants were beneath them. So this was also based on teleological thinking, i.e., that all things in the universe have a purpose, and he believed that a purpose for animals is for humans, and a purpose for plants is for animals. So quite some time later, after some of Aristotle's ideas were basically not forgotten but displaced, the man on the right here, St. Thomas Aquinas, he found the philosopher's ideas and kind of incorporated them into the Christian worldview. Importantly, Aquinas was canonized into the church in 1323, so his ideas are quite influential within that system of thought. So from his discovery of his ideas and his integration of them, Aquinas believed three things. One, that rationality is the moral standard. Two, animals lacked this rationality. And three, that the imperfect are for their purpose is for the perfect. And the perfect are obviously humans, those made in the image of God. Therefore, along these lines of Aristotle and his inspiration on Aquinas, along with various accounts in the Bible that give humans the nod of approval to dominate, subdue nature and the animals, the idea of the great chain of being was born, which is this image on the right. As you can see, at the top, we have God. Underneath that, we have angels. Underneath that, we have humans. And beneath that, we have animals and plants. This great chain of being, which I believe is called the Scala Natura. I can't pronounce it very well. I've never had this conversation in person with anyone. But this view is very much a dominant view, or was at least a dominant view in Christianity for a long time. Obviously, Christianity has maybe died down a little bit due to secularization. However, based on the hegemony of the church throughout most of history, these ideas have definitely been ingrained throughout history, and this is proven throughout a lot of recent research into people's justifications for eating animals. So a secular version of this idea came about through the French philosopher René Descartes. So this Descartes, who was quite a cited figure in the philosophy of mind, perpetuated this idea of the human-animal divide based on this rational capacity. So at the time of writing, Descartes, again, who was very much influenced by Aquinas and Aristotle, and also the mechanical view that was taking popularity within the sciences, he basically believed that non-human animals were mechanistic. They were unfeeling autonoma. They were beast machines. There are stories of Descartes and his disciples nailing dogs to boards and cutting them open while they were alive. I believe, I'm not sure this is true, but I believe maybe his sister's or wife's dog was once a victim of this. But yeah, he basically did this in the belief that any shrieks of pain, any kind of demonstration that the animals were conscious to him was not possible, based on the fact that animals were irrational and that they couldn't speak. This meant that they had no soul. So due to this, due to Descartes and a modern version of this, which is behaviorism, which both assumed that animals had a blank mental state, a black box epistemology, the experimentation on animals became justified within the scientific realm. So not only did Christianity promote and permeate this thought, but secular thinkers and science will also perpetuate this thought of the difference between humans and animals based on nature. No, sorry, based on the capacity to be rational. Of course, there are other capacities that animals are perceived to lack that mean that they can't, participate in the moral circle. But this is the one we're going to focus on mainly today. These ideas, again, were continued by many others like Kant, Bacon, and others. But realistically, this meant that the experimentation or the use of animals became justified within the scientific realm based on this anti-capacity of rationality. These ideas are still very much alive today, as I've mentioned before. So in countless pieces of research, social psychologists find that people often appeal to the natural divide between humans and animals and the lack of animals' mental state, the dementalization of animals, in order to justify the eating of meat and other harms against animals. So that was kind of some social psychology and some discourse related to the human-animal divide and the human-nature divide. For now, we're going to move on to law and discourse. So taking an examination of the legal discrimination of both nature and non-human animals, a notable fact is that the legal system, according to Decker, the legal system that we have is very much predicated on classical liberalism. Now, liberalism, I'm sure you probably all know a little bit about this, or quite a lot, probably a lot more than I do. Liberalism as a theory is based upon the works of the likes of Kant and his deontological views and his categorical imperative, Hobbes, his social contract theory, Rawls, and his theory of justice, and many others who don't consider animals as part of the ethical moral circle, typically based on their ability not to be rational and not to be duty holders, or their ability to be autonomous agents. So according to Decker, one of the major issues for giving animal protection to, for giving non-human entities, such as animals and the environment, protection within the legal system is based on this liberalistic underpinning. This liberalistic underpinning puts a premium on two things: A, the capacity to be rational, reason, and B, the ability to be an autonomous agent who seeks self-betterment and self-interdependence, etc. This characterization, however, based on the fact that many believe that animals can't be autonomous or reasonable, this puts a privilege on human beings, and also obviously nature can't be autonomous or rational either. So it puts a premium, a privilege on the human subject, and therefore our legal system becomes anthropocentric. Because of this, nature and animals are typically regarded as several things that do not allow them to be right holders with personhood. These things might be objects, things, or quasi things. There's been a lot of development in in Europe recently where animals become sentient, but this doesn't take away their position as an object or bit of property, but it does take them a little bit away from this idea of things. But they're still almost things in the sense that they don't quite have legal personhood in any kind of form. And because of this, they lack what Saskia Stuckey, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, calls foundational rights. These are rights such as the right not to be killed, the right to live, for instance. They do, however, protect what she might call simple rights, which are like secondary interests, in the sense of animals in the UK, for instance, have the right to be stunned before killed. But this doesn't really stop them being killed. It doesn't really allow them to have the foundational right like a human would have to life. And therefore, based on the fact that humans are privileged and animals lack foundational rights and legal personhood, as well as nature, they are not legally or adequately protected under the law. So the UK was actually the first country in the world to introduce anti-cruelty laws. Anti-cruelty laws is a useful distinction to welfarism, but I won't get into that. So it was the first place to do this with Martin's Act in 1822, which forbade the cruel and improper treatment of cattle. Since then, the UK has been regarded as one of the global leaders in animal welfare, although many suggest that this position, which the UK holds, is slipping away. There are many acts and policies, as you can see. These are just several. There are many acts, policies, and codes that have been introduced in the last 20 years. But my focus is going to be on the main two. So the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and the Animal Welfare of Farmed Animals Regulations of 2007 are the key legislation or policies protecting animals in the UK, farmed animals in the UK. There are several things that these acts have done well, and other things that they get wrong, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on all of that. I'm going to focus mainly on this idea of unnecessary suffering. The Animal Welfare Act and the Welfare of Farmed Animals Regulations reinforce this idea of unnecessary suffering that has precedent in case law in 1911, I believe, but I'm unsure on which bit of legislation that is currently. So one of the key things is that the 2007 regulation, which was introduced to further the protection and extend it to farmed animals, it states that it protects animals who are bred and kept for production, which, as you can see, that the discourse there, bred or kept for production, is very much riddled with notions of commodification, ownership, and the property status of animals. Nevertheless, whilst these provisions do aim to prevent unnecessary suffering, while this does sound like a progressive thing, in which in many cases it actually is, especially, I believe, Angus, you wrote a paper about how this can potentially give rights to pets. I believe it has achieved quite a bit for animals outside of the agriculture system, but for animals within this system, it hasn't. It's because it doesn't give adequate protection to these animals, in my opinion. This is because what is deemed necessary within this industry is very wide, and what is deemed necessary is obviously not very good for protection, based on the fact that animal death and harm are synonymous with this industry. You cannot have a chicken sandwich without the death of an animal, and you can't have a fast and productive and efficient food system without mass confinement, especially when you look at the consumption rates of today. These protections are especially precarious when one takes into account the profit incentives that dominate such industries as well, which try to cut costs and maximize profit. Therefore, you'll see a lot of farmers, a lot of individuals within these industries try to cut costs, and based on this, you see a lot more harm. But a lot of this harm isn't enforced very well, and there's not much compliance. A recent a recent report by the Animal Law Foundation found that only 3% of UK farms were inspected. Upon receiving a complaint, only half of farms that have received complaints about animal welfare issues have also been inspected. And 1/3 of these have not complied with the welfare issues, which means that just because these are the welfare standards, which are inadequate anyway, it doesn't mean that they're actually being followed exactly based on these profit incentives. And also, they also highlight that just over 0.33% of farms were prosecuted following these complaints. So it shows that there's not really much political will or funding, in fact, to actually follow up and prosecute animal welfare regulations, which again just reinforces the idea that we live in a very anthropocentric world whereby human interests are outweigh animal rights and welfare. Yeah. So I'll quickly just skim over this because I'm aware I'm taking a lot longer than I thought I would. So in international environmental law, the law that aims to protect the environment on a large scale, has very much similar issues. So without going into too much detail, the body of international environmental law consists mainly of multilateral environmental agreements that are soft, which means they're not legally binding, and they often rely on voluntary compliance. As such, they're very toothless, they're very ineffective. They don't have strong enforcement mechanisms to ensure that people are actually following the law or the regulations that are put in place. Moreover, just like animal welfare laws, these laws are generally anthropocentric, speciesist, and capital-ocentric, meaning that they tend to prioritize growth and the interests of humans and economic development rather than giving primary interest to environmental protection. This is really evident in the Sustainable Development Goals, which at heart give human interests and economic growth a premium over ecological concerns. You only have to look at the 1987 Brundtland report to confirm that. And also a lot of discourse that has since come out of the Rio Earth Summit, Johannesburg, and the 2030 goals as well. They're very much anthropocentric and focused on growth. Looking over to international criminal law, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there are many issues as well. The only law we currently have in international criminal law protecting the environment is Article 82B4, which is a war crime. It's limited in various ways. One, it talks about the intentional destruction of the environment, meaning that you have to prove a high mens rea. It talks about widespread, severe, and long-term. It talks about widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the environment, meaning that's got a very high and vague actus reus. And anyway, combining this high mens rea and this vague actus reus is very much impossible to do, I believe, and that's why there hasn't been any convictions. One of the major issues is the fact that its contextual element is as a war crime, meaning that you can't really charge a corporation for these crimes. So obviously in international criminal law, the ICC is mandated by the Roman Statute, and Article 25 of that suggests that only natural persons can come under the jurisdiction of the court. Natural persons meaning humans, really. There have been some advancements in war crimes, aiding and abetting crimes, I believe, that have included corporations. But as of now, the ability to trial corporations under international criminal law is quite far away, I believe. Hopefully not, anyway. And also, we don't have a law of ecocide. And even if we did, I believe that it will have to weigh human interests quite highly, based on the fact that we have to be pragmatic in the laws in which we put forward. So widespread state ratification and signing can occur, which I believe, if we have a definition like Polly Higgins in 2011, we won't be able to, because puts the environment first rather than human interest first. I hope that was an okay quick examination of the law, and I hope to finish this next section within the next 5 minutes. So another issue is the fact that humans and animals are commodified. Beyond property status, animals are othered as commodities. In the animal case, you see animals being referred to as livestock who are harvested, as if they were like grain on a field, gathered for economic purpose. We also see animals being referred to as production units, or their bodies or produce being referred to as yield. And the reason behind this is that farming and our entire schema is built around the discourses previously mentioned, laws that I've previously mentioned, but also the fact that we are encompassed within an economic system that prioritizes growth. As such, based on the fact that there are economic issues at hand and ones that relate to political economics, we should take a look at such fields of study to help us understand this industry and how it leads to ferricide and ecocide. So I'll do this quick because I'm sure you're probably all aware of the term of production. So it's a extension of Marxist theory to environmental issues, originally developed by Schneeberg in 1980, and it has several key elements that I'll quickly go over. So one, it suggests that capitalist systems necessitate growth in the search for profit. Secondly, in order to achieve more growth, we need to use more. It suggests that we need to use more industrialized techniques and technologies in order to grow faster and keep up with competition. Three, it suggests that such growth and industrialization necessitates constant withdrawals of natural resources and the subsequent addition of pollution into the earth. So to explain the idea of withdrawals and additions, I'll quickly just give some examples from the agricultural industry. Within this industry, withdrawals could represent potentially the constant deforestation that A, feeds a growing number of animals that we kill for slaughter, and B, it could also represent the fact that we use deforestation. We would withdraw those natural resources from the environment to build more space for for farms to be built. In addition, moreover, because that'd be complicated to say, the additions within the context of factory farming could represent the additional chemicals or greenhouse gases, for instance, that we put into the atmosphere based on this production, such as methane, ammonia, and nitrous oxide. As such, with the withdrawals of forests for via deforestation and the additions of pollution such as ammonia, methane, nitrous oxide, we create ecological disorganization because we take away, ecosystems, and we also put into the earth pollution, and therefore we get ecological disorganization or ecocide. Again, this just shows the link between both ferricide and ecocide. Moving on to the way I see this industry. So I've come up with this idea called the techniques of acceleration. You have any comments on it, please let me know. I've written a blog post about how this relates to bird flu, and my master's dissertation was actually about how the poultry industry increases pandemic potential and antimicrobial resistance. So I built this idea based on Marx's idea of the annihilation of space by time, Harvey's idea of spatial temporal compression, and Rose's idea of technical and technological acceleration. All these ideas basically together, what they mean is that within capitalist societies, this search for growth necessitates producing things or doing things in less time and less space. And as such, I have devised three key acceleration techniques that apply directly to the animal agriculture industry. So the first one is acceleration via concentration. This is depicted within the AI image on the right there, which I'm quite proud of my ChatGPT for making that. I didn't think it would. I must have given it some good instructions. This basically suggests that we accelerate, we compress space and time in this industry by concentrating the way in which we produce animals within smaller spaces and times, right? We use techniques such as concentration, and we use a bunch of different tools in order to create such a system that produces more animals in less space and time. The second technique is acceleration via homogenization. This is depicted within the image on the right here, which I stole from the Humane League. So, and I haven't referenced it, so hopefully no one sues me or anything. So this basically suggests that over time, what we do is we use selective breeding and other similar techniques in order to make animals similar in the sense that they are animals that have wide yield. They grow really fast and they have more meat on their bones, right? As we can see, in the 1940s, we had chickens that over 56 days, they only grew to a weight of 905 grams. Whereas today we have Franken chickens, which there is a lot of recent case law that's very interesting that I need to get more familiar with, that talks about how this is illegal. So we have chickens now that in 35 days, they can grow to almost 3 times that weight. And this is through selective breeding, which again has issues. Finally, we have antimicrobial acceleration, which basically suggests that we accelerate production via the use of antimicrobials. One, to potentially increase growth, although this was banned in the UK in 2006, and also to get to a point in our production systems where we can actually concentrate mass amounts of animals inside. We use antimicrobials in order to keep those animals in these bad conditions alive. So these techniques, they basically all reinforce each other, and they all also spatially and temporally compress the amount of time and space it takes to produce animals. However, as the treadmill production suggests, these techniques, these technologies that try to, aim for growth, but in less space and time, they also have externalities or harms that are spewed out based on this fact. For all of these, you see an increase in antimicrobial resistance. I have a book down here. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's got coffee stains on the front, but it's by Michael Greger. Fantastic read. Goes into how the poultry industry in particular is one of the leading causes of antimicrobial resistance, and also it really increases this pandemic risk. Again, to go into more detail about that, I have a blog post on it on a think tank I'm part of, which I'll share with you if you'd like to read that. We also have more environmental damage based on these techniques, because we're producing more and producing more, and having such intensive systems is naturally degraded for the environment, and also based on the fact that we're concentrating so many animals, we're genetically modifying them, selectively breeding them, that they have issues with their legs, for instance, and a bunch of other issues, and the fact that we're using antimicrobials also to grow them, it means that more animal harm is inflicted based on these acceleration techniques. I believe this is my last slide. So going further into the concentration technique, this is used in the UK a lot more than has been in the past. So although the UK has not been as industrial as states like the US in their farm systems, because most farms are actually owned by farmers in the UK. They are, however, subcontracted out by large corporations who will push these incentives and technologies on them. As such, poultry and pig farms are actually the most intensive in the UK, and these are actually the most precarious when it comes to transmitting diseases that can jump the species boundary. But we can have a discussion about it after if you like. There's been a 7% increase in broilers over the past, between 2017 and 2022. And there's also been a lot more fattening pigs in our system as well. This is because consumption rates are up. However, to accommodate this, there's actually been a 20% increase in intensive poultry farms within the period of 2011, 2017. And between 2017 and 2023, there was another 400 poultry intensive farms within the UK. These farms are precarious based on the fact that they have a capacity of at least 40,000 birds when it comes to poultry farms, and the legal max density is 39 kg per meter squared. If you go back to this slide, you can see that the average bird weighs around 2.2 kilograms before it is killed. That basically means that around 18 or 19 birds are confined into the parameters of 1 meter squared, which I'm not sure if you can visualize that, but it's not very big. So how does this concentration, this acceleration via concentration technique used in our agriculture systems link to ecocide? Well, as I mentioned at the start, ammonia has increased. I believe 40% of, I believe there's been a 40% increase in Wales in ammonia. There's been an 11% in increase in ammonia in Lincoln, which might make me go and close my window because I'm sure that's not good for me. And there's also been a lot more water pollution based on the intensification of these farms. At the start again, I mentioned the River Wye, which I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, which is this river here. There's issues with that river, and there's also other issues that are related to these the increase in these concentrated systems. Okay, so what this shows is that the treadmill production, the desire to produce more or to increase profit via technologies and industrialization techniques leads to more environmental harm within the industry of agriculture, based on the fact that we are moving towards, this is just the UK as well. There are many places that I believe are much worse than the UK. We have pretty good laws in comparison to a lot of other places, I believe. And so it basically suggests that the concentration is based on this economic incentive, and based on this, we see a lot more ecological issues. Therefore, ferricide, or the killing of animals, which I'm taking to mean for today's discussion, the mass killing of animals leads to ecocide, based on the fact that we create more intensive systems, and that is the material chain. So a quick little summary then. We looked at social psychology and historical discourse. I suggested that we have a specious schema that has been built up by various discourses throughout history and present as well. These discourses are permeated through modern industries such as the agriculture industry as well, and that these discourses infiltrate our minds in a sense and kind of create this human-animal divide or human-nature divide. Recent social psychological research by Costello and Hodson, 2014, and a bunch of other articles since then, they came up with this model called the interspecies model of prejudice, which basically suggests that all forms of prejudice are linked back to this human-animal divide. Right? This could be racism, sexism, anti-environmentalism. But what they also suggest is this human-animal divide is what causes specious social relations like animal agriculture. Therefore, as a possible solution, they found that the more we equate humans to animals, you see dehumanization, right? We know this from genocide studies, whereby people in the past have been equated to cockroaches, snakes, vermin, and these people have thereafter been discriminated against based on this discourse. Therefore, equating humans to animals isn't good, but showing the similarities animals have with humans has been shown by Seddon Hodson and other researchers to improve our views on animals. Therefore, we need to dismantle this divide and dismantle the discourse around it that perpetuates this idea. When it comes to the legal rights, we looked at the fact that liberalism gives a premium to reason and autonomy, and as such is an anthropocentric system. In a way to combat that, many believe that we need to give animals legal rights and personhood, potentially on an international scale, as this is an international issue. There's obviously issues with that. Pragmatically, there is an issue with developing an overlapping consensus in the terms of Jack Donnelly, the human rights theorist. It might be quite hard for us to, develop a wide-scale international consensus that animals are worthy and that they are worthy of rights. But still, it should be done, and hopefully one day it will be. And obviously, when we're looking at the thermal production, we looked at the fact that economic incentives create an incentive to create technologies and practices, techniques to create greater profit. And in modern capitalist societies, this is done through the destruction of space and time, i.e. Reducing the amount of space and time it takes to create a commodity, such as animals in the agriculture system, and that this creates externalities or harms, such as environmental harms. Therefore, in order to, maybe ameliorate this issue, we need to move away from intensive systems. And what I believe is we need to abolish all systems of animal exploitation. So, thoughts for the future. My PhD research is based on what I call the 8 stages of the Theriocide-Ecocide nexus, which is basically an elaboration on this. This is very much inspired by Stanton's model. I hope to continue that. There are more interrelations between speciesism and anti-environmentalism and Theriocide and Ecocide than I have discussed today, such as the sociology of denial. I think that's very interesting stuff. And I also want to finish on this, the possibility of there being a Theriocide, Ecocide, genocide nexus or continuum. As my project shows, I believe, discourse, social psychology, political economics, and denial as places of inquiry are all connected for these 3 harms. So I think there is, in fact, a Theriocide, Ecocide, genocide continuum in that ecocide leads to genocide, as shown by, I believe it's Lynch, I can't quite remember, one of the treadmill theorists, and also, as I've just shown, Theriocide leads to ecocide, but I believe that these underlying issues, these underlying ideologies, this discrimination through law, political economic factors, link all 3 of these things. Okay, that's me done.
Excellent, thank you very much. Really interesting talk. I gave you a 2-minute warning, but I did not enforce it because you got a full head of steam up, so I thought I'd better keep it going.
Thank you so much.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So we are a bit over time, but if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. I'll just stop the recording.